I'm not on the streets. These are the folks we serve. One other thing I thought I would share with you, because I think it's very relevant to securing funding, especially from the business community, is our encampment response strategy. And again, as we talk about funding, I'm very mindful we serve individuals, but Houston's encampment response strategy has been executed just brilliantly by the folks who work for our coalition. And when we engage in encampment, we engage in encampment to rehouse folks. We do not engage them to provide transitional housing or displace them. But we do have a navigation center that was funded so that as we engage encampments, someone, we don't have a lease ready, or there's a document missing, or there's some other half step needed to get them into a home, we have a navigation center that we've invested in that has about 120 beds and can be used for really up to 6 months. Its intention really is to be used for about 30 days. Our encampment strategy, you can see this number has been blown through even more since this was done in last year. And we've engaged 19 encampments, 372 individuals. You can see the success rate we've had. And somewhere around 80% of the folks we engage have been rehoused. 92 have self-resolved. Self-resolved typically means we've reconnected them with family, or they provided their own resources, and then 35 have not been, we've not been successful. Question asked in the last breakout was, do we track those folks and how they're doing? We do. After 2 years, more than 80% of them are still housed and seem to be doing well. As I mentioned previously, I think we need to look longer and deeper at those numbers. I think we all have concerns about making sure that it's not just 0 to 2 years, that it goes well beyond that until folks either have the long-term support they need or they become financially sustainable. So this is a picture we use both in fundraising, guys, as well as being proud of what we do. And there was a question asked of me recently in Austin, where I've spent some time, and I'm beginning to work at the University of Texas. And it was a question asked somewhat incredulously about, you don't actually let the business community tell you which encampments to engage or which encampments not to engage, but really, how to prioritize this. And my response to it was very simple, is we don't let them tell us what to do. And I'm part of the business community. We don't let them tell us what to do, but we do listen to them. And not only do we listen to them, but they write us really big checks, a couple $1 million a year to listen to them and to take into account their interests, whether selfish or otherwise, but their interests as we engage encampments. This particular encampment used to sit right at the entrance to the west side of downtown Houston. And it was an encampment that every day our business leaders and their employees, as they came into our central business district, drove by. We absolutely took into account when we were prioritizing encampments, not only the size of the encampment, its location, but the business community wanted us to address this, and to rehome folks from this encampment took an intense period of about 60 days, using data that we gathered from them, data in our HMIS system, and then a collaborative effort of our teams with our law enforcement. Our law enforcement is extremely friendly and extremely supportive of the homeless community, both our sheriff's department and police departments. It's really joyful to go onto the streets with some of the officers, because they know these folks. They do not harass them, they engage them. But that process led to this encampment being the folks in the encampment being just rehomed, and then the encampment being shut down, cleaned up, and it has not been re-engaged by the community. To the business community, we're able to show tangible results, not only in numbers, but also visual results. Kind of a funny story to go to CHIP phase 2. What we turned out with 65 million turned into $100 million. The county, city, and the state joined in with $20 million. So ultimately, we were given a goal to house more people, which we, check with me tomorrow afternoon. I'll tell you how we're doing. I think we're doing great, but we'll find out. And again, be mindful those funds run out at the end of next year. So in kind of summary about our coalition, we talk about funding in general, or specifically this is what's made the difference for us is, focusing on providing permanent housing with supportive services is job one. A steering committee that's highly inclusive, prioritizing those who are most vulnerable, and then streamlining services through our nonprofit providers. This is what's really important to me as I'm doing fundraising and engaging with my peers which is really a systems approach. We have a macro viewpoint. We have great flexibility, more so than our government entities do. And we raise money to support our system, knowing that it has to be scalable. We're always, again, mindful of individuals, but the system is what is sustainable. And this is kind of the key strengths is scale of effort, excellence, organization, and pragmatism. Oddly enough, we were, like I mentioned in the very first part of this presentation, really helped by, I think it was the LA Times writer in explaining what we do. And this is how we do it. So I was going to talk more about specific funding sources. So, but any questions or comments that anybody has on what I've shared so far?
There's one question in the chat on how did you drive alignment of interest of amongst so many different stakeholders?
Well, okay, so great. So that's the part that goes directly to it. And it's funny because I don't have slides on that, but so it really is, and like I said, I've got a piece of marble on my desk that just says there's no limit to what a man can do or what he or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit, which was President Reagan. And our success in Houston, and I'm speaking again as a board member from the governance standpoint, has really been based on collaboration. Our city and county, the city uses almost exclusively federal funds, if not exclusively, and the county uses a combination of federal funds and our general revenues, have really partnered with our business and philanthropic communities. And that partnership has been a value-based partnership because it really is committed. It's we as a business community and as a philanthropic community are in alignment with our government that we're committed to a singular shared outcome. And that's ensuring that homelessness in our community is rare, brief, and non-recurring. We've all learned that statement is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And that's everything we do. All three of those, government, philanthropy, and business community, have agreed to that's the focus. And to the title of this session, working with diverse funders, our coalition success with its diverse funders is really based on principles of trust and accountability. And again, my background is in real estate finance and public finance. And so it's I guess I would be remiss in not sharing with you all that trust was impaired several years ago. Prior to my joining the board and prior to the coalition's current CEO joining the organization. And our coalition was not as accountable as it should have been. And that trust that it had earned from its funders was impaired. And we were at risk of losing the support of our city's largest endowment, a multi-billion-dollar, multi-generational endowment, who had been a very generous donor. And it was a wake-up call for the coalition. And that's how I ended up at the coalition. I was asked by the county to come serve. Mike was asked by the city to serve, our CEO. And so there was a leadership change, and there was a renewed commitment to earning and retaining the trust of our funders, but especially our philanthropic and business communities, which were both significant contributors and continue now, thankfully, to be significant contributors. And our board was reconstructed. That was my job, to not only include those we support downstream, and the affordable housing community in general, but also our contributors. And we ended up, and this was very transformative, I think, and been very impactful and successful. The numbers speak for themselves in terms of our contributions. In addition to our board members, including leaders of those organizations we support, our board now includes leaders of, it includes the former chair of the endowment that we had an impaired relationship with. It includes several highly regarded business leaders. And so we brought all those people into the room with us, and they've been very, very supportive. So that's I don't know if that really answers exactly your question, but we put them in the room with us, and we held ourselves accountable. And like I said, that collaborative effort and shared vision and outcome really causes an alignment of interest, and it also allows folks like me, and I've tried to be as generous, my family and I've been as generous as we can to the coalition, but we do it based on outcomes, because what I tend to look at in my business world is, what did we accomplish? Were we on time, on budget? Do we serve those we meant to serve and accomplish our clients' goals? And many of those same values apply here. That's, I know I'm not using all the time that I was given, but that's, that's generally speaking, the structure that we've done to attract a diversity of funding. And like I said, we're very mindful of the fact we will lose that last $33 million will be received next year. And after that, we're back to where we were in terms of, and I said we're back to where we were. We will be in a better place than where we were before COVID, but we will be absent extraordinary funding that we've had. And our system does have risks to it, because as I think I was visiting the last group, is our system is very dependent on the private sector to provide housing. So we do have a vulnerability in our system that we're very aware of, and we're trying to address and shore up as quickly as we possibly can, which is not necessarily the topic of this conversation, but I'm happy to visit about it. So anyway, any other questions, comments, ideas on how we can do better here in Houston?
Can I take your question and then also bring it here to how we can be better in Arizona? Because I've studied, and I'm vaguely familiar with what you all have done in Houston, because it's pretty remarkable. I think with Mayor Parker coming in, and then partnering, it looks like, some zoning reform efforts with what you're doing on the collaborative side. But my question is, how could someone like Phoenix or Arizona take what you've done and implement and scale it outside of Houston here? What are your recommendations there?
Well, you put a smile on my face, because I work for Mayor Parker.
Okay.
Mayor, I should have brought it up. It didn't seem relevant to this conversation, but who deserves a tremendous amount of credit for this whole conversation, and actually really remiss in not doing this, is actually First Lady Obama. And in our city, then Mayor Parker. Real quick story, I think we have time, is when the HUD made a commitment to end veterans homelessness in, I think, 2010, 2011, there was kind of a joke about it, as Secretary Donovan tried to bring a bunch of mayors together to come meet with him to talk about this initiative, and apparently nobody showed up. The First Lady took on the exact same initiative with a different personality and different set of tools, and everybody showed up. She invited them to the White House. The next thing you know, all the mayors showed up, including our mayor. And like I said, I volunteered in her administration for 6 years. And she came back to Houston. In terms of outcome, guys, she literally, and I was chairman of the Housing Authority, she sat us down in a room, whether it was the head of the VA's Houston office, it was me as chair of the Housing Authority, and our CEO, our Houston Housing Finance Corporation, our Department of Housing Community Development. She got all of us in the same room. supportive services guys and said, figure it out. And I don't want veterans having to find you. I want you to find them. And I think that inspiration has carried through as we today in Houston, we have effectively ended veterans homelessness. If you're a veteran in Houston today and you want to be housed and are capable of being housed, because some of the folks just like when we have the encampments where 10% just refuse help, we still have an issue, but we can house you in Houston. And we saw the impact of that shared outcome. So it was very effective. How that translates to Phoenix is difficult. And in Houston, we do have the benefit. And I don't know how your system's set up, but we have a strong mayor. So we have a mayor who basically is, well, I've been told is the second most powerful mayor in the country, second to New York. It's their way or no way. So if they tell us to get our act together and get it done, city council really has to go along with that. And it can overcome, if the mayor chooses, a lot of NIMBYism and a lot of pushback. It's interesting, your comment about so we don't have zoning in Houston, but we have a form-based code. And the current administration has done a great job, particularly Margaret Wallace Brown, who is the current director of city planning, has done a great job. And Mayor Turner's done a good job with overcoming some of what my daughter taught me to call haters, who others would call NIMBYs, who try to impede the construction or acquisition, redevelopment, or construction of new affordable housing. And again, I don't know how our lessons apply to y'all's. We have chosen some different strategies, as I understand what's been done in Phoenix. We don't, like I said, we don't have any shelters. I take that back. I said that the other day and I got really corrected. We have shelters for special needs populations. Women who are in abusive relationships or domestic violence, and we need to take care of immediately. We look at the special needs of children who are aging out of the foster care system. We have special needs shelters, but we do not have a general population shelter. But for our navigation center, which is again what we call if we're helping you come out of an encampment, we don't have every T's crossed, I's dotted yet. At least we've got you into a safe, clean space. We've got all the support. We have supportive services there. We have the paperwork people there, and we can keep you moving through the system. It is not intended to. We visited a great shelter in Phoenix that was relatively large. We don't have that here in Houston. We've chosen not to engage in that space, and we've also not chosen to engage, which is probably frustrating to me. If you look to Austin, although Austin has not done many things well in the homeless space, it does have a group called Foundation Community. Not Foundation. Foundation Communities is great, but Community First Village is a great model for housing that has been done entirely up to now entirely through philanthropy. It's stunning. It's 500 chronically homeless who become a community and then self-supporting, self-sustaining. And it's really a joyful place. In an otherwise really tough group.
And I think, Maria, if you want to unmute, you can go ahead. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem. So hello, let me lower my hand. So Maria Javese with Bank of America. Question, again, I continue to hear very positive work on, I know my peers there have been part of that. What have people have to give up, whether it's a government entity, a leader of a nonprofit, or whomever else? What did you all have to give up to get to this point? And have you felt that it was worth it? Like whatever that item or issue or whatever it was to get to that collaborative work.
Oh, nobody's ever asked that question. And you say you were at Bank of America?
Yeah. So David Reese and
okay, one of your peers is on our board.
Yes.
Yeah, so what do we had to give up? Primarily, this is funny. I know we're recording, but it's probably ego. That's been the single biggest thing. It's again, not much. This has been so obvious for so long. What we also and part of it was partisan politics. We hit this is actually kind of cool. is so forever. Our county government was run, and we're supposed to be nonpartisan, but our county government was run primarily by Republicans, and our city government was run primarily by Democrats. My politics are very purple, so I actually don't care. I'm outcome driven. But as much respect as the two have between them, they would never play together, and they wouldn't co-invest together. And they had to give up their political egos in order to do that. And who got credit for what, to the point of President Reagan's comment about, if you don't care who gets the credit, it's amazing what you can do. And when our county government shifted 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess, the first thing the county judge, woman is Lena Hidalgo, who's gotten some national press, 28-year-old who nobody expected to get elected, and she did. We knew it was coming, but we just didn't know when it would hit, and it hit. And one of the first questions that her administration asked is, how do we work with, how do we get this done? And I drew a chart on a wall and said, you break down these silos. Our county tends to have money. It runs our mental health system. Our mental health system is not collaborating with the city. Tends to build housing because the money it gets from the feds tends to be for housing. The county tends to get money for mental health services and healthcare. You've got to play nice together. And it took what was given up was the egos of our elected officials. It was always there. And I cannot tell you what an impediment to success that is. And that's where we go into I would get a real quick anecdote that we have done. And I don't think the guys would mind me sharing this at all. I may have mentioned earlier, I was invited to this room in LA when I was out speaking at USC, and I thought I was being invited by one foundation. It turns out there were 5 foundations, room several $1 billion worth of foundations. And I started to talk about encampments and stuff. And they said, no, we want to talk about governance. And we talked about it. This presentation, what was on screen a minute ago, scale of effort, excellent organization, and pragmatism. And what's been the impediment to success? And I said it was the county and our government's not playing nice with each other. But what we saw was Houston Endowment, was that big elephant in the room, has a couple $1 billion in Houston, told our city and county and those around us in our coalition, to be inelegant about it, get your shit together. And if you don't, we're going to stop writing checks. But if you do, we'll write a bigger check. And that apparently has happened in Los Angeles, where from that meeting, in fact, the Conrad Hilton Foundation was very generous, donated $100,000 to our coalition to thank us for simply with that one idea of galvanizing philanthropy. And there's a great Harvard Business Review article that's a number of years old about the importance of philanthropy and philanthropic leadership. And I don't know your community well enough, and it differs from community to community. For example, Austin has an absence of galvanizing philanthropy because the wealth in their community is relatively young, as opposed to Houston and Los Angeles and some other communities. And, again, we think our city is relatively young, but we're approaching a couple 100 years old now. And so our wealth is multi-generational, and it's committed to success of our city. And that turned out to be transformative even in LA. So the Los Angeles guys, we ended up with the number 2 at the city of Los Angeles and number 2 at Los Angeles County having dinner in Houston 6 months ago. And it's kind of funny because it's become an urban legend kind of story around LA. It's how that happened. And it happened because the Conrad Hilton Foundation and their peers said, we'll pay for it. So I don't know how that helps y'all, but hopefully it does. But your philanthropic community can be extremely impactful. Particularly if it engages the business community, which in many communities it does. And it's a great source of leadership. That was our job. One was to get, in our specific case, the Houston Endowment on board, because when they came on board, their peers who may not have been as substantial would follow into that philanthropic effort. And I would suspect, like the Bank of America folks have been very generous to us here. They probably looked at what other people are doing too. If they, I know y'all make your own decisions, but if they did it, there's a reason we should look at it too. And there is probably a herd mentality to it.
Thank you. Appreciate the response.
Any other questions before I dive into another one? We'll open it up to anyone. Well, I just wanted to, I'm in awe of Houston, so I really thank you for being here, Lance, and for the people on the call in context, in Maricopa County and in Phoenix over the last 3 years, we've gone from 65% of residents being able to afford a home down to about 18%. So we've lost all affordability on the purchasing and renting as our prices increase here. And what we've looked at for Houston, not just on what they've done for their unsheltered population of focusing on getting them shelters first, is that they've had a significantly lower decrease in their affordability. So Houston is doing a lot of things right, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And a second part that Dean asked to his question that I think you touched on, but just want to go back to is if everyone has a shared outcome, but different ideas on how to get there, how do you navigate? And what group is accountable for the final decisions? And I think you touched on that, where two parts are you need to have a strong leader, which I guess would be your mayor in Houston, but then also that everyone else in the room needs to check their egos at the door and just come in with the intention of we have to do what needs to be done in order to solve this problem. But is there anything else that you would add on different people coming around the tables, how to navigate that? And then ultimately, is there just one point person that's making these decisions? Is that the mayor? Is it your collaborative? Who has the final say?
It's so funny. Final is such a big word. I would say the say it's really been entrusted to us. I mean, we're held accountable for that decision. And again, it's so far so good, but we, unlike some other communities, and I don't know if I spoke to this earlier in the conversation, I can't remember what I said the first time and now second time, but having the right group in the room as leaders, whether it's at a staff level, or frankly, to me, more importantly, at a board level, if there does come a shift where there's a disagreement or which direction should we go, if you have the right leadership and the right board, particularly, we've found it remarkably successful in sorting out issues. And I'll give you specific examples I think anybody cares about, is we had an impairment in our relationship with one of our largest service providers who wasn't happy about something. I don't know what it was, but they were unhappy. And it was, you could just feel it bubbling up. And my CEO told me about it as chair of our board. And he had already not been able to work it out with his peer at the supportive services group. And so it turns out that supportive services group chair was on my board. So I picked up the phone, called the chair, and said, we need all four get in the room together and sort this out before it goes any further. I know without that type of conversation, it could have very easily blown up on both of us. And it would not have been helpful to any of us for that to happen. But there were, both respected, but still competing visions of outcome, and we had to resolve them. But we did it internally. We didn't ever let it get where it was out of control. And sort of say shut it down as quickly as possible. We shut down the conflict, but we resolved it. And we didn't really shut down. We shut down the conflict part. We resolved the issue, and we've not had that come up. And we still have, daughter calls them haters. We still have different opinions in Texas. The Texas Public Policy Foundation, Manhattan Institute, Cicero Institute. They tend to ignore our results in Houston because they tend to be inconsistent with their philosophies. I respect many of their philosophies. I engage with those folks. I have with them. I sit down with them. I don't agree with them in many cases, but we'll listen to a lot of different folks. But at the end of the day, our models happen to work for us. And by the way, sir, I would encourage you in terms of what we've done in terms of housing affordability to look at some of the recent stuff coming through the Houston City Planning group right now. One of the most transformative things we did, and I don't think anybody really appreciated at the time, is we essentially eliminated minimum lot sizes a long time ago. And that has allowed for the densification of our city as a real benefit to the city. It has had some unintended destructive outcomes, so not every good thing happened, as it allowed for communities that were in transition of gentrification become more vulnerable more quickly. And I don't think that was necessarily a good thing, but it did allow for housing costs to be managed where you could take a 5,000 square foot lot, subdivide it into two 2,500 square foot lots and build townhomes or other small footprint housing on those lots. And it's more often than not yielded a good outcome.
Yeah, that's a great point because we have policy in Arizona on minimum lot sizes, ADUs, right now, and how that can affect the supply, which then affects the price. With just 2 minutes left, can I ask you one final question? Did you fix the problem? I mean, are you done? It sounds like you've done a lot of hard work on the infrastructure side. Is this something that you need to just manage and maintain, or where do you see it going from here in the future?
No, and I totally didn't address this with the group. So we have a structural impediment to success. The reason we still have 3,000 or 4,000 people on the street is we have a supply problem, and our supply is extreme. So there was a number actually that was shared with me by a guy at the Cicero Institute who we would rarely agree with philosophically. But he pointed out that we had this huge increase in permanent supportive housing units. And it surprised me because I think of permanent supportive housing units as units we actually control in our own supply and inventory. Turns out that using the vouchers, and I say turns out, I knew this, I just never had classified it this way, is a significant number of folks that we have in housing and receiving permanent supportive services are using vouchers in privately owned apartment complexes. And in Texas, source of income discrimination is legal, shouldn't be, but it is. And the landlord, in one case, the landlord had 60 of our clients' residents living in his apartment community, a very large community, about 600 units, decided he wasn't going to renew those leases. And there's not a dadgum thing we can do about it. As we look back at the vulnerability of our system, we have this vulnerability that could arguably cause us to have an increase in those who are unhoused. And meanwhile, we're struggling to increase the supply to deal with that last group, because we actually have vouchers. We have cash to pay rent for folks that we can serve. We just don't have places to put them as an allegate, but for them to live. And we are working with our apartment association to find other creative answers to that, including master leasing those units as a coalition, so that we step in into the middle of the relationship between the resident and client and the landlord, as opposed to a traditional voucher where they're in a direct relationship. And there appears to be some willingness. In fact, it was initiated by the apartment association's leadership to how can we help that. And if we can overcome that impediment, we may get to the next level of success. If we fail, we may go backwards. So it's a very fragile number we're dealing with right now. And again, I'm mindful they're individual people, but I look at the big numbers. That's what I have to look at it from a system and a structural standpoint. So
appreciate it. And I think we're going to get all kicked out right now anyway. So perfect timing. But thank you, Lance. I really
thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Hope this was
it.
helpful.
And if there's any other questions, feel free to
Sure.
reach out to Lance directly too.
Yeah, for sure. You can find me. So thank you.